What propelled you to want to join this company?
I just always wanted to work for my dad.
Did he say you start at the bottom and you work your way up, or he said you can start at number 2?
Well, that's maybe what I wanted to happen.
Did anybody say, well, is he really ready to be president yet? Or
Everybody, including myself.
do you ever have problems with your cable?
Sure.
Is it intimidating for the cable repairman to come to your house?
Would you fix your tie, please?
Well, people wouldn't recognize me if my tie was fixed, but okay. Just leave it this way. All right. I don't consider myself a journalist, and nobody else would consider myself a journalist. I began to take on the life of being an interviewer, even though I have a day job running a private equity firm. How do you define leadership? What is it that makes somebody tick? When you graduated from college in 1981, you went to University of Pennsylvania. You then joined a company that your father had started, Comcast. At that time, it was a relatively small company. Did you ever, in your wildest imagination, think it would become the leading company that's become in the telecommunications area?
Well, we had about 20 million in revenues that year, and my father, when asked that question for many, many years later, used to say, of course. And the reality is, of course, no way did we ever, either of us, dream that we would be lucky enough to be Comcast, NBC Universal, sitting here with the kind of wonderful products and company we have. And I pinch myself every day.
Did you ever say to your father, I don't really want to join the company, I might want to do something else? What propelled you to want to join this company?
Well, I've thought about that. I just always wanted to work for my dad. He used to be in the men's belt and suspender business way back before he started Comcast, men's cologne. We used to play with the cologne growing up as kids, and he would have a passion about it. He just made it seem fun for me, and he never pushed me, even in a little bit, to want to work for the company.
What was your father's background?
Well, he got out of the Navy. He was living in Philadelphia, met my mom, they got married. They were married 72 years till he passed away a couple years ago. He was very interested in business, also went to the Wharton School, and he was an entrepreneur, made golf club putters. He went into Muzak and some marketing, and he worked for Senator Benton in advertising. And so he liked the marketing and advertising product side. And one day, you know, he got into men's cologne, and he just loved the smell and the marketing aspect, and then the same with a product like a belt or suspender. Technology came along, and he got himself convinced that Sansabelt slacks, that is polyester pants without belts, would be the technology that could put him out of business, so he sold his business. And he was walking around Philadelphia, apparently, 1963, and a guy came up to him and said, Ralph, I've got a new venture for you. You ought to buy a community antenna television system in Tupelo, Mississippi. And as he told the story, he said, where's Tupelo? And what's community antenna television? And the answer was birthplace of Elvis Presley. And in Tupelo, they couldn't get CBS from Memphis. It was a valley town. So they put up a big antenna on the top of a mountain and ran a community antenna, CATV, and those were the early roots of cable television.
Television was for free in those days, and now you had to pay for it in Tupelo, so was that hard to convince people to pay for television?
What he liked about the business was the subscription nature. So in belts or cologne or many other businesses he had been in, you have a product, you sell it, if you get sick next month, you're out of business. In our business, and what he liked about recurring revenue is you have to go borrow a lot of money, build it, and hope they will come, and then you have a recurring business that you then have a base to work from.
Where did the name Comcast come from?
Great question. Doesn't get asked very often. It's amazing that in 1963, being a community antenna television company, he dreamed up the name Comcast. Com was communications, cast was broadcasting, and we're going to merge and be in the future of communications and broadcasting. So he was very visionary in that respect.
You buy the cable franchise in Tupelo, Mississippi. How much did he pay for that?
I think a few $100,000.
$200,000, okay. And what did he do after that? He started buying other franchises like that?
Yeah, so the next door town was Meridian, and he would go down to Tupelo. He never moved there. He had a philosophy of decentralized management in that you would have a local manager, and they should feel like they own the business. So there's a general manager of Tupelo, and they then went and bought Meridian. One day he got into Michigan, another day New Jersey and Pennsylvania, and we started buying other operators. And as the business evolved through the 80s, and one day it wasn't just a valley town business and a rural business, ESPN and HBO and CNN came along. It was suburban and urban. And so there were 30,000 cable franchises awarded. And eventually they needed to consolidate to be more like a TV business or phone business where you had larger service areas. And that's when Comcast really stepped on the pedal.
So if in 1972 I had bought your stock, what would I be?
If you bought 1,000 shares, came public at 7, went down to 25 cents, I think at the all-time low. That's another story. You would have over $11 million today, an 18% plus compounded return for 45 years. If you put the same $7,000 in the S&P 500, you'd have just over $500,000 with about a 10% return.
That's not bad.
Not bad.
Okay, so when you joined the company, did he say you start at the bottom and you work your way up, or he said you can start as number 2?
Well, that's maybe what I wanted to happen. No, he definitely put me through a wonderful, kind of de facto training without either of us really ever talking about it that way. So one summer I climbed poles and learned to be an installer, had real trouble holding the ladder because I was pretty weak and 15 years old. Another summer I sold door-to-door HBO subscriptions and cable subscriptions. It was brand new in Westmoreland, Pennsylvania. Another summer I went and sold Muzak, which was a business Comcast was in at the time, installing and selling.
Right.
So when I got out of Wharton School, undergrad, I was like a finance major. He was like, well, let's go and do deals. And he said, no, move to Trenton, New Jersey. I never worked in cable. That was one of my later businesses in life, was my dad was in his 40s when he started Comcast, which is a great lesson for people. If you haven't found your thing yet and you're 40 years old, it's not too late. And many people think it's way too late. And he said, but I never will know this business. Why don't you learn it as well from the bottom up every job? So I moved to Trenton and learned the billing system and worked the counter when customers paid their bill. And when the truck delivered the new cable boxes, it was a brand new system in Trenton. We'd get out and everybody roll up their sleeves and unload the warehouse. So I had a pleasure of doing all the jobs, and something for me just clicked. I loved the business, I loved being around people, and I loved being in management at a young age.
When you're in a business with your father, do you call him in front of other people Dad, or do you say Ralph, or what did you do?
I called him Ralph. And when he had all his grandkids, he had all the grandkids call him Ralph. And one of the great things that he did for my daughter, who was now just had her own child a few weeks ago, he said, every kid learns the word no. That's one of the first words they learn. So he got on the ground with all the little grandbabies and would go like this and said, yes, yes. And one of the amazing things my wife and I enjoy with my dad, and I think my siblings did, and with my mom, is his positive attitude about life. And it came out for all the employees. We had a yes attitude.
You became the employee in 1981 when you joined, but you became the CEO in
Well, we didn't use that title between my dad and myself. 1990, I became
the
president. Yeah, I was about 30 years old.
And did anybody say, well, is he really ready to be president yet? Or
everybody, including myself. But I was very eager to, having worked for many years, half a dozen years in different jobs in Trenton, in Flint, Michigan, in Dallas, in Pittsburgh, and then in Trenton again, back in Philadelphia, and then in the corporate side in finance. My dad was still active, but he was 40 years older than I was, so I was 30, he was 70, and he wanted to begin a continuity without an abrupt change, so we worked as partners really from then on until he died.
There's a concept called net neutrality.
To me, it can also be called regulation. And oftentimes people say, oh, you're against net neutrality. That's not the case at all. We really have a great interface called Xfinity X1, and you can come over and you can see, our guide. You can come over and go back, and you can do on demand. And this is all coming from the cloud. It was really a game changer. Every click is going out and back faster than you can click just looking at it. If you say, Tom Brady versus Russell Wilson. You're a sports fan. And we've now added data right there. You can pull up their stats.
People like products of, let's say, Amazon, or they like the products of Apple, or they like the products of Starbucks, and they therefore tend to like the companies. Why do you think Comcast and other cable companies are not that well liked, unlike other companies whose products are popular and the companies are liked?
Well, it's a great question. Television used to be free, and now most Americans are paying a lot of money for it. And every year it can get more expensive. And that is the sum total of sports and the cost of actors and the cost of many, many more channels and high definition and the technical capabilities. And if we are passing all those increases along that we've experienced, no one remembers that. So that's partly why I think it's an industry issue, but that's not a good answer. And so what we've set about at Comcast was to, not accept that and to try to find a way to emulate some of the companies you just referenced who have a lot of goodwill. And so we've thought that by making our products better, we changed the name of the company to Xfinity. We came up with a product called X1, and it took about 10 years in development. We're building a technology center here in Philadelphia, and we're trying to pivot the whole company to have a rapid deployment of new products that delight and surprise you all the time. Back that up with an advertising and messaging and understanding by the consumer of what it is you get. And then maybe the link that was missing after we achieved that with some of our products was service. Showing up on time, getting it right the first time, having the network be reliable.
Do you ever have problems with your cable?
Sure, once in a while.
And what do? You call somebody, or you call your office, or what do you do?
Well, I use it as a learning experience, first of all. And so we're constantly trying to improve and have a virtuous cycle of repair and improvement. If my cable's out, I use my app. I then will go back and say how many customers were affected. And there's a culture that I believe we have improved massively, but we have ways to go.
But is it intimidating for the cable repairman to come to your house, you think? I mean, they know they better get it right, or they know it's you?
They hopefully a little bit of both, but I ultimately try not to get so much different treatment that it's out of touch with what our customers are experiencing, but I'm sure there's some of that happening.
Right, so cable TV blossomed in the 80s and 90s, and you grew to 20-some million customers. And then at some point, broadband came along. In effect, you had built cables in everybody's homes, and then you realized you could use those cables for internet access as well. When did it dawn on you that you can actually sell more than cable TV to those same customers?
There was an aha moment on that, and that was a meeting in Seattle of a group that we formed with other cable companies called Cable Labs. We went to see Intel, Oracle, and Microsoft. And while we were at Microsoft, Bill Gates was talking about someday the data business for you guys will be bigger than your television business. And I said to Bill, would you consider investing in our industry, because we're putting all this fiber optics, this new thing no one had really heard of. Wall Street hated it. Our stocks were low. We were spending capital. This is one of those cycles where you can not always know the answer, but you feel like you should invest and hope that it will work. And he said, I think fiber will change the game for you. How can I help? I said, why don't you buy a percentage of the room? And then everybody laughed, and I said, okay, just buy Comcast. And he put $1 billion for Microsoft into Comcast, non-voting stock, no board seat, no Microsoft products.
What kind of return did he get on that $1 billion?
400%, and it started the broadband wars that have been the beneficiary by consumers the last 20 years.
Are you worried that maybe people will say, I don't want to buy my cable TV at all, I'll get everything through the internet? Is that a problem that you have?
Well, first of all, that reality is happening. We've seen it coming. The other aha moment for me was another great leader, Steve Jobs, who we were visiting trying to see if we could collaborate with Apple a decade ago. And he said, why don't you put Wi-Fi in all your cable boxes?
And you
and
said,
I went home,
Wi-Fi?
I went to what's Wi-Fi, because it was before anybody else. And now we have more Wi-Fi than any company in America. And we have the fastest Wi-Fi.
You bought from GE, NBC, Universal. Was that something that was natural for you to do, or are you worried that maybe you shouldn't be in the content business?
Well, There were people who had that worry. We had a dream that the perfect company, if you could create it from scratch, would be in the distribution but also in content. Both were good businesses. They kind of are symbiotic. And so we had gotten to a certain scale, and scale matters. We had dabbled in content. We owned the Golf Channel, we owned E! Entertainment, we had some regional sports networks. And along came the recession of 2008, 2009, the financial crisis, and GE wanted to sell NBC Universal. We'd been knocking on the door for a decade, and one day they said okay, and we jumped at it.
And things like Hollywood studios, sometimes people own Hollywood studios like to go out and hang out with the stars. That's not you?
It's not really me. I care about movies, but I've never been on a movie set.
Now, there's a concept called net neutrality, which 99% of Americans probably don't fully understand. Can you explain what net neutrality is and why it's such a big deal?
To me, it can also be called regulation. And so, what do I think we stand for? What we've tried to say from the day Bill Gates helped us with the idea of the internet was that you could go anywhere you wanted, and that you could do so without being slowed down or delayed, or in the case of privacy, someone knowing your behavior in a way you don't want. And how do you have a set of rules that gives you, the consumer, that confidence and a certainty, and at the same time allows for investment and innovation as new applications come along? And we have always said we stand for certain principles. Those principles were codified by the FCC, and then the court said the FCC didn't have authority to codify those principles. So another FCC came along and said, here's another way to do it. Let's put it under something called Title II, which is a regulatory regime designed for the phone system back in the 1930s. And we did not agree with that. And that can get bundled in a phrase net neutrality, and oftentimes people say, oh, you're against net neutrality. That's not the case at all.
You must go to Washington from time to time to talk to legislators or other people. And is that a painful part of your job, or?
Well, I like advocating for Comcast. I'm passionate about our company and our beliefs. I think we represent sort of what American dream is all about. You start from literally Tupelo, Mississippi and no business, and you take risk capital. We've never had a guaranteed rate of return like a phone company. We've borrowed $60 billion to build the company. No one says we'll be here in 50 more years. We're 50 plus years old. And we've created 150,000 jobs. And they're all mostly 90%, 95% of it here in America. So from time to time, depending where the pendulum's going, there are proposed things that are going to have real implications, and you try to articulate and advocate for that.
You have cable, you also have broadcast channels, you have movies. I mean, how do you have time to watch all the things that your company's producing?
Well, I don't see everything we do. I try to see some of a lot of what we do.
If you see something you don't like, do you call them up, or you just kind of?
No, I have a point of view, but I also know what I can do and what I shouldn't do.
You have cable, you also have broadcast channels, you have movies. I mean, how do you have time to watch all the things that your company's producing?
Well, we grew up in this business. When I started back in 1981, they were just coming out with cable channels, and I was very lucky when Ted Turner called me up and asked would I come on his board. I think I was in my late 20s, maybe early 30s. I was the youngest person on the board, and I saw him literally change the world with CNN, and literally change the world by putting NFL games on a new network, TNT, and taking the MGM library and bringing it to cable television and building new channels, Cartoon Network. So I always thought, well, someday it would be nice if Comcast could help do that as we continue to evolve more and more niches in television. So how do I have the time? Well, I don't see everything we do. I try to see some of a lot of what we do.
If you see something you don't like, do you call them up, or you just kind of?
No, I have a point of view, but I also know what I can do and what I shouldn't do, and I try to have some discipline on that. Right. But I sometimes, just share opinions. But I think we have some of the best professionals.
On technology, right now you have to be at the forefront of all kinds of technologies. Do you personally review all the new technology inventions?
We're building a new technology center, which I'm very involved and excited about, but I can't do every invention. But since it comes down to one remote control and one guide, I do get fairly involved and see things before they come out, try to help the team.
What gives you the greatest pleasure in the job you have?
The fun is that answer changes over time. It hasn't been the same old thing my whole life. Today, I mean, sadly my dad's not here, so there was a wonderful moment that went for a long, long time, and we're so lucky. Today, we are, as a leader, trying to figure out where this industry is going, and that dynamic change of technology and innovation in things like artificial intelligence and the cloud and the competition, which has never been greater, stimulates you. And trying to think through how to build value for shareholders.
In college, you were a squash player, and you were an All-American squash player.
I loved the sport, and the best players in the world, of which I never was close, are super and superb athletes, and as good as any athletes, I think, in any sport. And when I got to Penn, I had a squash coach who was the opposite of my dad. I've always said maybe the second or third most influential person in my life, one of the top.
Coach Malloy?
Coach Malloy, and he was a Marine, an ex-Marine, and he really drilled into me hard work, winning, strategy, tactics, and I went on and played a great run in squash and had a chance to compete internationally after college.
So now you compete still at the Maccabee Games. You've won the gold medal there and silver medal, and you're now going to play again there?
My children have both done it, my two daughters, and my son said, you and I do it, Dad. So we're going to go this summer to Israel, compete one more time. It'll be my 6th time. I proposed to my wife on one of the trips. It's had a real significant meaning in my life to be able to compete, represent our country, be a Jewish athlete, and at the same time share my family experiences as we've all played the sport and had a lot of fun with it.
Well, you're now in your 50s. Is it hard to get in shape to play in the Maccabee Games when you're in your 50s?
Well, I was retired for about 10 years, and it is very hard to short answer. Every body part of mine hurts right now from training, but it gives you a purpose. I guess I like goals. It's very similar to Comcast, and you don't always win, but it's fun to try.
Are your children interested in coming to the company?
To me is a really clear answer. You should do what you want to do with your life, not what your parent wants you to do with your life. And for me and my family, that's how you end up having a happier life. And if it's something you want to try out, great. It comes with the presumption that you're not that good. You only got there because. So that's a higher burden. And as I've talked to my own kids as they figure out their lives, there's different answers to that question.
What are your great philanthropic interests?
Well, we've just made a really cool involvement with the Children's Hospital of Philadelphia here. We're going to do genetics center at Philadelphia's Children's Hospital. Is arguably the #1 children's hospital in the world. So as genetics technology comes along and research, can they continue that leadership? So we created a genetics center. We've been involved in some of the arts. My wife chaired the building of the new Barnes in Philadelphia, something really special for this city. Dr. Barnes's collection was maybe the best impressionist collection outside the Louvre in Paris. And for Philadelphia, really gave it some additional world-class stature.
Your father was in the company for a long time. You could do this another 20 or 30 years. Is this what you intend to do for the rest of your professional career?
I love what I do, and it's hard to imagine something else, but I also recognize that you've got to keep the company fresh, and so we'll take it one day at a time.